Hi, this is Dr. Jaime Module. Welcome to Module 12, Detaching in a Positive Way. In the course, if you want to fly higher, you must be lighter. I don't know if you're familiar with the story, Who Moved My Cheese? But it's a good example of at least a couple of the characters practicing this positive detachment. And by positive detachment, I mean that in the continuum from addiction to attachment, a real strong attachment, to then this maybe appreciation, to this sense of positive detachment, or some people might call non-attachment, but I'll say positive detachment because it has a sense of still being present, still being connected, and not disconnected. But in Who Moved My Cheese, we have these two people and these two mice who are living together in this maze, and they live on cheese, and at some point the cheese supply moves or runs out, and the story is about how they problem solve. And the people basically, one named Ham and one named Ha, are stuck in the victim role and stuck in blaming and trying to stay in the same place and taking everything very personally. The two mice, called Sniff and Scurry, just do that. They sniff out new cheese and they run to see if it's available, and if it's good, they stay until it's time to move on. They don't take for granted that they're going to be in one place for forever. And so that's an example of this positive detachment. They didn't take it personally. They just knew what they were supposed to do, which was survive, which is find more cheese, and they moved on. And so that's a good starting point for us, because too often victims and survivors are really, really attached, if not addicted, to different ideas, different emotions, different substances. The survivor-thriver place is about making those choices for ourselves that are congruent with who we want to be, with our purpose. And so we can't be overly attached to a version of ourselves, the way that we think, the way that we want things to be. We have to be able to flow and to change and adjust so we can get to our purpose. So we do have physical addictions, physical attachments. We do have intellectual addictions, intellectual attachments. Think of the debates going on in the political world. I mean, people are very dogmatic in beliefs. That's a kind of attachment, to a strong attachment to a way of thinking that keeps us from being flexible, keeps us from problem solving differently. Emotionally, we may have some real strong attachments and real dependencies that keep us from being interdependent, that keep us from being flexible and letting go. In the last module, we talked about letting go of emotional baggage. And we may be attached to good versions of things as well. I know a big part for me has been being attached to being the perfect guy, the responsible and helpful and do no wrong and do good for others. And even these good versions of ourselves have a shadow side. When we are overly attached, then we don't pay attention to ourselves and really being more responsive to what we need. So this positive detachment is really a spiritual practice in my mind. If you think of artists or actors or maybe even athletes, I mean, they're very present when they take up their particular role, but when that's done, they take up another role. And so artists aren't attached overly to their work or to any one particular performance. They may appreciate it, but they put it down and take up another role the next day. And so for us, this positive detachment is, in my mind, being kind of like a stem cell. Being able to approach a new situation, see what needs to be done, participating in it, creating something for that, and then moving on, to take up the next thing that's congruent with our purpose, who we want to be. So this is really, really congruent with this idea. The third important question, the first is, who am I? The second, what do I want? And the third is, what's my purpose? What's my contribution? So more and more, we're congruent. It's not personal. I don't know if you've heard that said to you, even if it feels personal. There was that Tom Hanks movie about the book sales where he said to her that her small business was being run out of business. It's not personal. Instead, you're just saying that because it didn't feel personal to you. It felt personal to me. And so we are attached. We do care about things, and that's really, really important. But when we focus on what we want, what our soul seems to be drawing us to, then we can even let go of these things that we care very much about in order to have that bigger next thing, that bigger part of where we're going. There are these 4 agreements. If you have ever read the book, The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, that are helpful to think about positive detachment. The first is, don't take things personally. The second is, let your word be impeccable. The third is, don't assume. And the fourth is, do your best. And in each of these, the first one is most directly, literal to this topic. Don't take things personally. What other people say, what other people think, we can see them as projections that really have nothing to do with who we are, what we want, and what our purpose is. In fact, in an earlier module it talked about when we begin to make changes in our lives, we may get pushback from other people because we're experiencing what they want and not what is in our best interest. So don't take things personally. It is easier said than done. And if you can do that, you're closer to them taking up the role that you need to take up for your higher purpose. Don't assume. So don't let our own attachments tell us then that we understand what's going on around us, so we can read other people's minds. So don't assume. We have to be more open, more unattached to knowing. Let your word be impeccable. So the fact that we will live up to what we say, that we will use words in a good way, is a good focus, because then we may have to let go of our old habits, our old ways of communicating with others, our old ways of focusing on, maybe call it ego in what's convenient for us. And so let your word be impeccable, the word in us, the word in the bigger picture of truth, of service. And so we're less attached to this ego and more working towards this congruity with a word that we're called to be. And do your best. We can not necessarily always live up to the other ones, but we can always do our best. And so we don't have to be so attached to always being right, to always being perfect. That's a real difficult thing for a lot of us who have worked so hard to overcompensate, to cover up some of the past hurt that we've experienced. So this positive detachment is really spiritual work. It's really soul work. And I can even feel it myself now. The more that I can just slow down and breathe, the more I can feel grounded and let go of other things that may be going on, other things that are not so helpful or that are distracting. So there's an expression that there are only really 2 feelings in our lives. One is yum, that we like something. One is yuck, that we don't really like something. So if we think about that as being grounded in what is this that we like, we feel happier. We can take that breath and be connected to our bodies, to being calmer, being grounded. Then from there, we're able to start thinking about the feedback that we get from other people in a different way. We don't have to react and take things as personal to us, but we can see the feedback in other people's behaviors as something that can help us to learn. So as in the past, we focused on our own individual kind of recovery and awareness. And from this point on, we're starting to think about our connection with other people. And the more open we can be without judgment, we can see different behaviors as something that I can learn from. So for example, in a group, you may see someone being very argumentative, and instead of maybe reacting to it, you may think, there's a part of me that's actually pretty argumentative, and I don't have to dislike that or disown that. I'm detached enough to not take it personally, to learn from it. There may be in group work people who are off task, or people who are domineering, or people who seem to be disconnected, and it's really easy, again, to look at those as individual behaviors out there. And as we start to think of ourselves as spiritual beings, we start to see that there's a connection, again, if only in learning. Maybe this is a part of myself that I'm not paying attention to, and that I can be more aware of. So I don't have to disconnect, so positive detachment is still being present, but it's not necessarily taking things in a kind of a reactive, personal way. So we're spiritual beings having a human experience. That's the shift more and more as we go through this course. And as that, we want to pay attention to the ways that we have held on to things that are not helpful. We want to pay attention to things, the way we've held on to things that even may have been very helpful for us. And I'd like to read bits of a poem by David Kiley, I think I'm pronouncing it properly, and it's called Leaving Home. And he's an Episcopal, an Anglican priest. And this poem says a lot about growth, even to something that has been a really important part of ourselves. It says, "I'm off. I must leave the stifling theology, the patriarchal structures. I must leave the enduring prejudices based on our God-given humanity, the color of my skin, my gender, or how my sexual orientation is practiced. I must leave the mentality that encouraged anyone to think that our doctrines are unchangeable. I must leave the belief of those who insist that our sacred texts are without error. I must leave the God of miracle and magic. I must leave the promises of certainty, the illusion of possessing the true faith. I must leave behind the claims of being the recipient of an unchallengeable revelation. I must leave the neurotic religious desire to know that I am right and to play at being God. I must move to dangerous and religiously threatening places. I must move to where there is no theism, but still God. I'm off, but to where? Only God knows." So this is, this as we develop, as we understand that we are not the roles that we take up, we're not our positions and our possessions and our titles, that we're spiritual beings having this human experience, we don't have to take everything so personally, and in fact we can shift to think of whatever's going on as something for us to discover, another clue to discover more deeply who we are, what we want, and what our purpose is. So I invite you to continue your discussion with others, work in the workbook, and I'll see you in the next module.